Any creativity happens out of irritation. Forget about inspiration. I'll tell you what, it's being irritated and trying to work a circumstance out. It would be enough to be able to draw a circumstance. Yeah, good luck there. The impoverished hand, the eye to see, to hold it in your mind. God, to be able to do it at all. For why we don't paint. Painting and making art is really difficult in this time. It's really, really difficult because it's at the end of a wave. It always will be. People look at great sort of classical art and, compared to art now, what appears is like trash. And I can understand why people think that way, because what we are is it's like a shared tension. The fish in the fish bowl, like we're in the same fish bowl together, and we're all feeling it like it's one thing. You can't really separate that. People sort of say, well, like the mind is only confined to its own psychology. What our sensitivity is, like a psychic sensitivity is none. It doesn't go beyond the body, except that it sees in the world and appends its feelings to being outside. But then things show up that, appear to be well connected for where there's an understanding. And in the next connection, there's no understanding at all. You talk about the relationship of things, because that's really been the thing that's, it's a relationship of a body and a circumstance and a space. Like whether it's male or female or for wherever these things show up in life or wherever the dominance is, the adult person puts so much on their male-female relationships. And, I've certainly been there. It's like, what's important about it? A lot of times, all that people are doing is just chasing their own gratification. Just their own gratification, And then you sort of think that there's some type of high union, I call it tantra. Some great art. It just becomes Kama Sutra, a whole heap of positions or sort of, exotic and extended sex. And you see all these things. And I've depicted all this stuff. I've lived through all this stuff. Like we all have. Nothing's really that foreign. Some people will go, oh! Yep. You get exposed. It's just an exposure, the whole thing. And the artist is part of all that too. It's just this constant exposure to stuff. For what we call stuff in a life. Anyway, the inclination's been here since I was a child, It's been one of my long-standing bad habits. Why do I paint women? Jan asks. Yes? Why do I paint women? It's a go-to. It's something that I can do, like playing a G chord on my guitar. It's just something there that I know how to do. But, and when I say that, I wonder why. You draw something and it seems so stupid. Like, what am I going to do with this? There's no action. It's just something on a sheet of a page. I'm in the 2-second dimension. It's so narrow. It's so flat. And to preoccupy yourself with the surface of a wall your whole life. When there's this beautiful life here, multi-dimensional life here. You could just sit in this and do nothing. But that for the habit of making art. And it makes art, I went for a lovely walk yesterday, Jan, and so I tried to paint landscape. And it's like, I've never painted before. And I like it. I'm sitting there agonizing over the problems of art and where to go. Because, this is a job. You have to make something of it. And so you're starting with something so simple.
Is this the one?
Yeah, well, that's
Can you show it?
And I like it. But I know people go, oh, it's not.
The camera?
It's not good enough. I'm doing it without having glasses on. And, it's like I've gone nowhere. This is what the child used to paint like.
Do you want just to leave it there?
It's like, you go nowhere. You know,
Bring
back
it,
to the
bring it
basic.
here.
Show this one
Leave
here.
it here. Okay, I'll bring this one here.
And I did Talopa 2 nights back.
Leave it here.
2 nights back.
Take that pin away.
I'll put it into the frame. Is that in the frame?
Yeah, just leave it here. It's still in the frame.
You can
Take
see
that
it all.
Pin away.
Oh.
Take that pin away. I'll move it over here. Yeah, there. Still showing. That's
And
right.
you know, making sense of for why someone does anything. Well, you know, like you're in the history of art too. You know, like you don't do it in a vacuum. You're exposed to the infinite inclinations of what it is to make art. It's like being a musician or a jazz musician. You know, you listen to all these fabulous things that have been invented musically. These incredible things have been achieved. You know, like you're sitting in a circumstance, you know, like for where there's so much energy and also the opportunity, you know, like to sit down and do a fabulous Baroque mural on the top of a ceiling in some grand building that's going to stand for 500-600 years. Well, you're going to put a certain effort into that. You would think you would, unless you're silly like Picasso and sort of do something horrible on the wall. So Picasso's murals were horrid. Stupid pity. But anyway, his inclination was to be the avant-garde. So, you know, it was in all the gesticulation of sort of throwing it off because you were good enough. Anything that comes from your hand is good enough. You know, like I have to be so centered in my own abilities for technique and relationship of materials, and also the ability to be able to express something, perhaps, because expression is still here. We are still feeling the values of our own hearts. You know, so a question like, why do you paint women? It's like, yeah, there's certainly no desire in it. Just looking at things, the questionableness of everything is inherent in us. It's part of what we are culturally, everything together, because you can't separate yourself from any of this. You can by being ignorant to it, but there's a sensitivity toward it. You know, the artist is supposedly atmospheric in its sensitivity. Fine, if you're an impressionist or something, there's an atmosphere that one could apprehend. But here the atmosphere is really, really articulate, difficult, jarring. Not really. I mean, this is all perfectly sublime. This is perfectly good as itself. This doesn't really need to do anything. But I will. I've got a series of paintings coming up now. And I'm going back into my child inclination. Start again. Just start again, you know? Like everything has failed. Not because things have failed. Things are just... A painting is a thing in itself. If that's sustaining, it can be just a few marks on a bit of paper and something of it is really good. And I love all of that. I love it, not just here for what comes out of here, because there's a questioning nature, but, you know, you look at something long after an artist is gone and say, well, that's just really good. That's just really good. And you just accept it for that. There's nowhere else for it to go. It's just that, you know. But there was a certain amount of concentrated energy toward that, and that was that. Fundamentally, it's just entertainment. It's just entertainment. It's a way of whiling away the time. Art's good too because it somehow just goes into the atmosphere. It becomes the atmosphere. It's so nice to walk around this house. Every so often I'll come out of my room and I'll wander around the house and just look at the art, because I love art being everywhere, obviously. And I'm removed enough from the art to be able to see it differently. You know, still there's this critical nature that looks at it and goes, well, is that a good painting? Does it stand by itself? You know, and some are a bit thin. Not because I know the inclination, but for it as a thing in itself, you know. is it strong enough to stand alone as a thing in itself? Perhaps not. A lot of these things sort of sit in context to where it's come out of. Anyway, you have Buckley's chance of trying to work all that out. I wouldn't suggest you do.
So did you have a relationship with a woman?
I would say so, dear.
What would you describe in one sentence?
In one sentence?
Okay, in 3 sentences.
Well, what of it? So what? What part of it do you want? I mean, so what? What? What a relationship. What's telling is just incredible ignorance that goes on for so long, for where a self shows up as having some bit of knowability about what it's in, but really not having much idea at all. It has plenty of ideas, but it's just living out of ideas. And that somehow it just emerges out of the circumstances and time and vitality and the stage of life that you might be in. So when you're in youth, you've got all this supposedly disposable energy. What do people do?
If you use one word to describe.
One word?
Yeah, what would that be?
It would have to be hyphenated. People fuck around.
Was that what you were doing?
No, I think sort of generally, you're just trying to sort of get things done. And, sort of certainly in the middle adult life, there was certainly a lot of orientation towards sex. The women sort of stand out like flowers and you behave yourself. That's just, it's like being a bee in a flower garden. And, there's certain modes of conduct that we sort of go with that. All you're really wanting to do as an organism is pollinate the flowers. But the culture says, here, this, that, like this. And what it does is it sort of shifts the whole orientation of what becomes sexuality and an orientation towards sexuality, because it's not just about sex, but it's a lot about sex. And for all these perversions, and I'll call them perversions, or maybe there's a better word for it because that sort of sounds too derogatory. What's the word for it? Permutations. All these permutations of possibility, for how that shows up is only in accord with where the field of conduct shows up in the culture. So you mark a time, and I wouldn't say that this, which is outside of the language, there's a formality. There's a formality in how a self is to show up in this time, which strips the authenticity, horrible word, authenticness, horrible word, like you've got some steady standing position on anything. It can't be stripped out of its circumstance. It can't be stripped out of the context of its circumstance for how these things appear. But no one, we have the cognition to be able to see this because this is the experience of lifing. We're in life, and this is all whole and all complete and perfect as it is, with all these things which might stir us to feel irritated or want to contest or whatever shows up, because all of this is emanating out of life. All of this is perfectly acceptable, everything. But if you were to contrast it against a peaceful space, well, that happens in the steady space of where we just work alone. And that's the beauty about art. You actually just sit there facing a wall, smudging colour And it's quite delightful because it's so immediate. It's a little different to being a musician because you have to be equipped with a hypersensitivity and really, really well versed. It's like speaking. Speaking is very, very different, or communicating even is very, very different to painting. Painting is very immediate, except that the standing context of what it is that says to you inside, you do this, is out of the context of that space which you feel it to be. You have to make incredible assumptions, and you're going to fail because you're not going to meet all these sensitivities. And you have to be able to sit with that fact that there's got to be this constant space of failure, no personal failing, but a personal failing in so much that one could be so sensitive to be able to feel out into everything. And somehow this is here too, like for everything that goes on in the world, because it's just the address of human beings talking to human beings. And so, like one-on-one conversation might be useful, might not. Supposedly communicating to the whole. Yesterday's painting was, we went for a walk and I tried to paint something of our walk, and I started thinking, and I was so delighted in the process of it, I thought to myself, this is what I'll do. I'll just try to paint immediate experiences for how I see it to be, with my failing eyesight, with paint with my glasses off, just try to get something of it for where I stand in the natural state of my body so far, where, at this point of what I would call the third stage of life, the senior position, to try to get something of that for how those abilities show up in this physical organism with its failing eyesight and its ineptness and its narrow ability to focus and its pleasure to find pleasure in simplicity. In simplicity, like it doesn't really expect a lot of itself, really. This is nice, So this is what I'll do for today. I went for a nice walk with Anna Marie and Ekomananda yesterday down into Morialta Falls, and it was incredibly beautiful. Like it's really nice to be out in life, in its abundance. Smell, the scent of the cold air, all these beautiful things that can never be described in a painting, really. Although some people do achieve it. Some people do achieve it. Not sure if I can, but anyway, it's ongoing. That path has been set. No, so like it doesn't really matter for men and women. I would disappear it in the third stage of my life and just say we're human beings together without putting any pressure. It's not to say that the male organism doesn't recognize a distinct sort of beauty in the feminine, or that there's something in the energy of that. There's something beautiful between the masculine and the feminine. It's like a battery. There's something in the difference of that, but it's certainly not obsessed. It might look to be, but it's not. It's not obsessed by anything. It doesn't need to acquire anything or have self-centered ambitions to gratify small desires. just looks to be too superficial. So I don't know what else I could really say on that. I don't know. I think I've exhausted that subject in my life. It's good, not demanding anything. It doesn't even know, wouldn't even really know what to do with it.
How did you exhaust that subject?
Well, it just has been. It seems to be sort of, it's naturally sort of happened. You can.
So by going through a relationship,
you can beat a lying dog. You can beat a lying dog for not being active. At some time, the dog will sort of wince and sort of look up to you in loyalty and sort of go, "Why are you beating me? Why are you beating me? Why are you expecting something of me more than where I am? Is there something we're going to do? Are we off for a hunt? Are we doing anything?" Let sleeping dogs lie. That's how it shows up, like that.